All right. What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota, Danny Abdel-Jabbar here.
Yep.
Danny, how's it going?
Chilling as per usual. I just got back from Six Flags yesterday. I know that you went down to Busch Gardens, so I decided to go to a coaster park myself. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. What was your favorite coaster, Danny?
It's got to be a toss-up. It's El Toro is crazy. It's a wooden coaster. It's giant, and it hauls ass, man. And I would say Superman because it you're in a flying position, and then when you go upside down, you're laying on your back, and I like the G-forces. It's like you're laying down. It's kind of cool.
Is that the one that plants you upwards like you're about to get railed up the butt?
Yes.
Okay.
It puts you in the position.
I'm sure that's your favorite one.
Yes.
See, I like Six Flags roller coasters. I like their roller coasters. Their best one is Nitro, I feel.
Yeah, I love Nitro too. That's a classic for sure.
Six Flags has the only roller coaster that gets me sick.
Which one?
Medusa.
They don't have that anymore.
They don't have that?
No, I was just there. They don't have that anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
It's probably getting too many people sick.
Right?
It's not that it's scary. It just literally just made me feel like
nauseous.
I was in like NASA space training, like astronaut training.
I love that shit, dude.
I felt
more juicy.
I like the big drops, but I like any roller coaster, but sometimes it's just too much with the flippity doos and the loopity doos, or just my head rocking back, and I feel like I'm gonna get an ulcer.
I have this one new ride from it's Cyborg, and it's off the DC character Cyborg, and it's just it spins you, but then it also rotates in 3 different axes, and it's just you're spinning, you're flipping, and you're turning at the same time. It's fucking crazy.
Sounds fun. Who'd you go with? The GF?
Yep. It was fun.
Nice, brother. So I'm kind of pissed off.
Why?
Because the other day I signed up for one of those dollar subscriptions for Wall Street Journal.
Oh,
you
really?
know how when you're reading an article, you're
they give you 3 free for a month, and then you're damn it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So you sign up, you're like, okay, it's $1. I really need to read this article for what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So I'll read it, and then all of a sudden I'll totally forget. It's 9 out of 10 times I forget. And I just got billed from the fucking Wall Street Journal.
That's how they get you.
Fake news Wall Street Journal, huh?
Jeff Bezos taking your money right now.
Fucking Jeff Bezos. He doesn't own Wall Street Journal. He owns Washington Post.
Oh, my bad. Same shit.
But the same thing happened to me with Haaretz. But I actually read.
You did it for Haaretz too?
Yeah, the same thing happened. The exact same thing happened to me with Haaretz and foreignpolicy.com. So this is the third time this has happened to me. So as
Google gave me the Times for free for a year.
Really?
Yeah. I'm sure they'll charge me next year, but they gave it to me for free for a year, which I thought was cool. As
George Bush said, the old Texas proverb, you fool me once.
Shame on
you. Shame on you.
Fool me twice. Fool me twice. You can't fool me again.
He got it wrong. That's the joke of it, though. But, guys, today we're actually going to be talking about Sykes-Picot.
Oh.
And the reason why, I know, smooth transition. Right?
Highbrow shit.
The reason why we're talking about Sykes-Picot is because a lot of people don't really know that much about it.
I mean, I don't know that much about it.
Yeah, it's not people's fault. It's something that's literally ignored in history class. Were you ever really taught about World War I in general besides the basics?
What I was taught about World War I was that it was the lead up to World War II, and then we learned a lot about World War II.
Exactly. That's basically World War I in a nutshell. World War I in school is basically trench gas mask, and maybe you'll talk about the famous book All Quiet on the Western Front. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that correctly, right? Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much it. You don't really learn too much about World War I. You don't really learn too much about the early 20th century in general. You kind of just skip. In American history class, you go from the Revolutionary War, then you go right to the Civil War. Maybe you'll hit the War of 1812 and things like
Rarely. That. I feel like I only got that one in college, honestly.
I got the War of 1812.
Oh, that's good for
we
you.
got, the Louisiana Purchase and Manifest Destiny, and
Hmm.
you get to Civil War, and then from there you go to Reconstruction to like the Progressive Era, and then you kind of just skate by World War One, which I don't really know why they skate by it. It's such an important piece of history that's just so misunderstood and so ignored. And I think the main reason why it skipped, in at least in American history classes, is because the United States was only in the war for about a year or so.
Right.
And then you learn like basic stuff like, unrestricted submarine warfare, the Zimmerman telegram. And then you don't really learn anything about the battles that America was in. You don't really learn really anything except the end of the war. And you learn about the 14 points and the League of Nations, and then you skip the World War II. Like there's
Right.
a period between World War I and World War II. It's just skipped.
Nothing happened.
You talk about the Great Depression, and then you're like, then we got out of it because we killed some Nazis.
Yeah.
And that's U.S. history class in a nutshell. So you have an entire piece of history that's really unexplored for most Americans. I'm sure that in British textbooks and Australian textbooks, it's covered a lot more, just because the loss of life was so much higher in Britain and France and Australia and Germany and all the other major participants of the war. The casualty rates were so high. But I mean, the U.S., 100,000 men died, so it's not like
right. It's not a small amount of people.
The biggest battle, or one of the top 3 battles in American history, was in World War I, the battles of the Argonne Forest. So it's still kind of perplexing that you're not talking about it. Like the casualty rate was right up there with World War II casualties, considering the time that the U.S. was in the war. But we're not even talking about that. We're just talking about the general lack of context in World War I.
Right.
And why it's just kind of silly. But we wanted to talk about Sykes-Picot because not that many people know what it is. I'm sure a lot of people are listening and are like, what's Sykes-Picot? So during World War I, they called it a world war for a reason, because it was fought all over the world, believe it or not. And what Sykes-Picot...
The Great War, that's what they originally called it.
What they originally called it.
The Great War.
The Great War, until it got a sequel. What's that in the background?
Yeah, it's my roommates. I already texted them to lower it. You want to give it a second?
Sure.
All right, go ahead.
So what is Sykes-Picot? So in Sykes-Picot is basically, it's not how the Middle East, the modern Middle East, was formed, but it tells a big part of the story. So in 1915, during World War I, Britain and France tried to make a secret deal to resolve tensions in the Middle East due to their imperial ambitions. This secret deal is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Right.
In the deal, they split the Ottoman Empire's Middle Eastern territories between themselves. So remember, the Ottoman Empire was once very, very large.
Right.
It gradually declined. And by World War I, the only assets they really had were in the Middle East and in Turkey.
Right.
The British and the French did this. They did this by drawing a diagonal line on a map that ran from the Mediterranean Sea to the mountains in Persia. So literally, the two guys negotiating the deal, why it's called Sykes-Picot, is Mark Sykes and Picot, the French dude.
Picot.
They literally Mark Sykes literally took a crayon, fist in his hand, and just colored it, and probably drunk, and just drew a diagonal line.
Straight across.
Like this, literally just type in Sykes-Picot. You'll see the diagonal line is from the Mediterranean Sea right up to Persia. So the territory north of this line would go to France. So modern day Syria, Lebanon, and northern Iraq. Mm-hmm. Most of the land south would go to the British Empire. So the rest of Iraq, Transjordan, which is Jordan, give it Transjordan, Kuwait, and what's now the northeastern coast of Saudi Arabia. And no one could really agree over Palestine. So
things never really change, huh?
Yeah, no one could really agree. no one could really agree over Palestine because, everyone really thought they had a claim over it, especially
Right.
the French. They said, there was a lot of Frankish blood that was spilled during the Crusades. For the British, the same thing. There was a lot of, Anglo blood that was spilled during the Crusade. So everyone thought they had some type of claim to Palestine. So eventually no one could really agree with it. It was put under an international administration. At this time, empire building like this was pretty common. As we know, if you look, it's too loud back there. It's coming into the feed.
All right, give me a second.
Oh yeah, we did. I'm sorry.
All right, we should be good.
All right.
So no one could agree over Palestine. So they put it under international administration.
Yeah, so no one can agree over Palestine. It was put under international administration. And at this time, empire building was pretty common. But by the 19th century, by the 20th century, it was becoming more and more taboo. Like after you rape Africa for, a good 30 years or so,
It's not very cool anymore.
It starts to become a little taboo.
Mm-hmm.
So what the British did is to mask their imperial ambitions, the British started supporting Zionism. They started publicly supporting the Zionist movement to make Palestine a Jewish state. They did this in order to secure the eastern flank of the Suez Canal while also dodging the accusation of empire building, which what they were essentially doing.
Suez Canal being a major shipping lane, of course.
They were trying to protect their imperial ambitions or claim to Egypt. And everything really, it's like looking at the British Empire and the history, everything, it sounds like everything that they do is for their claim to India. It's for their claim to Egypt. But yeah, they wanted to have a friendly government in place in Palestine to protect Egypt, which was like a major breadbasket and important strategic part of the British Empire.
Right.
So they thought, well, this ended up completely backfiring, of course. They thought the Arabs would be mad, but they would eventually recognize the economic advantage of Jewish immigration because we all know Jewish people
have money,
tend to do pretty well. Saying this is a positive.
Yeah.
And the Arabs were furious.
Of course they were.
This resulted in the British limiting Jewish immigration to Palestine, which really pissed off the Zionists now.
Right. Now they're pissing off two people.
So now you have two angry parties, the Arabs. The Arabs and the Zionists are both mad at the British. So another part of this is that under the League of Nations, both Britain and France were supposed to direct all these new countries that they were basically either set up puppet
countries, air quote.
Countries. They were supposed to direct these countries to independence. But they really dragged their feet throughout the entire process. And at the end of the day, this resulted in revolt and terrorism from both the Arabs and the Zionists who were in that area. So that's kind of like what Sykes-Picot is and what it led up to. But I think, honestly, the most important thing to do is not necessarily go through the Sykes-Picot agreement itself, because it's frankly, it's kind of boring. It's basically a bunch of people just arguing over land.
Right.
Which is not always boring, but I feel like it's way more important to understand like the total context and what actually led up to Sykes-Picot. Like why was the Middle East important? How did we end up here? Like how did we end up at this point? Because that goes largely ignored. Like most people who know about early modern Middle East history and all of that, it really just kind of starts with like, oh, the British and the French got greedy and they started splitting up land and all that shit. And there's no like subtlety. There's not subtlety, but there's no nuance in there. There's no substance in there. Like why were they? Like why did this happen? I feel.
And it's really good backdrop for a lot of the stuff that we talk about. I mean, we focus on a lot of geopolitics and specifically around the Middle East, just because it happens to be very relevant today and important. And I think it's good for everyone out there that's listening and or watching today to kind of get a bro history lesson on like How did this all happen?
So there's something seriously wrong with Iraq and Syria. I don't mean like there's something wrong with Iraqis and Syrians. I'm saying there's something wrong with the actual names of the countries. I mean, the names of the countries are an absolute enigma in itself. Like, of course, the name Syria is connected to Assyria, which was an empire in the Middle East for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And
biblical.
then it was biblical meaning. And the Greeks and the Romans used to refer to pretty much all areas east of the Mediterranean as Syria. You hear of something called the Greater Syria Project, which is basically like the Levant. So the Greeks and the Romans actually used to refer to that whole region as Syria. Mm-hmm. In Syria, when translated, it just means the region. However, the British forgot to write down how they came up with the name Iraq. Like, we don't really know where the name Iraq comes from.
Well, that's interesting.
It is interesting. The popular theory among historians is that Iraq is based on Uruk, which is an ancient Mesopotamian city-state. It's also the word for riverbank, but like no one really knows where Iraq came from. Like, it's not confirmed. I'm sure some assholes listening is like, oh, I know for a fact it's but I don't.
The Uruk thing is pretty interesting, though.
It probably is, but like, I don't think there is a source of how they actually came up with the name Iraq. It's all speculation.
Maybe.
So, there's some Brit who's like, hey, mate, what are we going to call this Palestine? I don't know, Menji. Why don't we call it Eric? Like, hey, Eric, you forgot your porridge. Something like that. That's how I kind of imagine how Iraq, the name. All these fucking cunts. Oh, Iraq is a fucking cunt. What did you say? Iraq? Sounds like a perfect name. Something along the lines of drunk Brits in a tent.
And French.
Lines. Well, the British were the ones who named it. They were the ones who had the administrative control over that area, which is now modern-day Iraq. The French took Syria, but we'll get into that later. So I think to understand, like, we're going to have to go back even further now. Let's go back in our time machines. Let's go back 1,400 years.
We're going to get our time crystals.
Good. Alex Jones is going to give us our time crystals, and then we're going to fly back. We're going to Soros. We're going to have to strangle him as a baby. The globalist threat. No, really, to understand the root of the problem, you have to have a basic understanding of Middle Eastern history over the past 1,400 years.
Oh, that sounds riveting.
No, but it's not. I'm gonna fly through this. So
all right. Let's try it.
All right. So I'm going to try to make this as concise as possible, and I'm going to miss a ton. So, leave your complaints at our P.O. box. It doesn't exist. So the Arabs started building an empire in 633 AD. And by 750 AD, that empire, it stretched from Spain to Pakistan.
Yeah.
Despite what many critics say of Islam, the Arabs were not genocidal maniacs like the Mongols or the Spanish. They actually showed an incredible amount of tolerance to native religious practices.
That's right.
In fact, believe it or not, when the Arabs were first when they were first conquering Africa, they preferred not to convert their subjects to Islam. They preferred to tax them instead.
So they were socialists.
They were just imperialists who were taxing the population. So yeah. It wasn't like they were totally the good guys, but they enforced something called a jizya, which is a tax on non-Muslims. But no, like there's been more violent times and other times in Arab history, but the Arab.
What was it called again? A what? The
jizya,
tax?
A jizya.
Jizya? I barely know you.
Jizya.
You didn't catch that.
Jizya is the jizya is a tax on non-Muslims. So what ended up happening is that when they were conquering northern Africa, when they were stretching from, essentially they were stretching from Jerusalem or Damascus all the way down to what's the last country on
the Arab Peninsula?
Not the Arab Peninsula, northern Africa. Morocco,
Tunisia.
They prefer to tax them, which makes sense. And by 750 AD, when the Abbasid Caliphate took over, Islam was only the third largest religion in the empire.
What were the first two?
I believe Christianity and
Zoroastrianism.
no, the native Barber religion.
Hmm.
I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it was Christianity. It might be Judaism. I don't think it's Judaism though. But it was during the Abbasid rule when the empire started really to Arabize.
Mhm.
And when you say the word Arabize, I mean adopting the Arabic language and all the customs that go along with that.
Right.
I don't mean I hate the modern day like conversations about like race and stuff
Mhm.
because they like lack so much context that ancient peoples constantly invaded each other. So you're a mix of everything, really, when you think about it. Like,
If you happen to be in one of those countries that got invaded a lot, right?
yeah, you don't know where the hell you're from. Like,
Right.
I that's why I hate when people take like pride in their race. I think it's such a stupid thing to take pride in because you don't know, you goddamn don't know where you're from. You know how many people were raided and raped and conquered throughout the entire world history. Usually, when you say somebody's a certain like, you know, Arab or something or Turkish or whatever, you're meaning that they're speak that like linguistically they're that.
Culturally, they're that.
Culturally, because if you look at people in the Middle East who are Arab, you'll see black Arabs, you'll see
Right.
super brown Arabs, you'll see white Arabs,
That's right. Asian Arabs, right?
You'll see a very different makeup of people who consider themselves Arab. Like
That's right.
I believe the Sudan is considered an Arabic country.
It is.
Like,
Yeah, it's predominantly
like,
Muslim there.
They're in the League of Arab. They're in the League of Arab nations. Sudan is they're black African. Like you wouldn't think of them as a stereotypical Arab. So Arabize meaning that they started adopting Arabic customs and languages and things like that.
Right.
To make a very long story short, the Arab Empire doesn't last very long. The Persians end up start taking out pieces. The Turks start carving up pieces, and the rest of the empire ultimately breaks up into small states ran by warlords. And it was during this time the Arabs went through 3 apocalyptic events, and we've talked about this on other podcasts.
Yep.
So you have to understand a lot of the reason why the Arab world, I don't want to say behind, but yeah, we can say behind. There are some setbacks that they hit that were pretty hardcore.
Pretty big ones, yeah.
One was the Crusades, which millions of people died.
Right.
Brutal war, millions of people died. 2 was the Mongol invasion. The Mongol invasion, which, I mean, Baghdad at that time was the scientific capital of the world.
And it got sacked.
That's right. It got completely sacked. And not just sacked, I mean, like sacked. Game of Thrones, worst episode of Game of Thrones, Red Wedding sacked.
Like
anyone who's taller than
like Daenerys Stormborn taking King's Landing back sacked.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. Like anyone, you know how the Mongols used to do is that they used to anyone who was taller than like a wheelbarrow or a wheel, they would have their heads chopped off, and then they would assign a certain amount of people to chop off as many. So you'd have a head quota. So you'd be like, all right, everyone's got to chop off 100 heads. If you have 1,000 guys, it's a lot of 100,000.
I'd hate to be a part of that daily morning stand-up. Where are you to quota? Where
are you to quota?
I'm only 37 heads.
We're gonna have
a week left.
We're gonna have to put you on a head pip. So, other people in your class have been they've been hitting their quota. They've been chopping off 100 heads a day. You've only been hitting 70 a day for a week now.
Maybe you should shadow them.
Maybe you should shadow them and see what they're doing right. We're just trying to help you. We're not firing you. We're just giving you encouragement.
Fear-based encouragement.
Yeah, fear-based encouragement. We'll just leave you here forever, and we'll kill you and rape your wife.
All right, so that was the second one, right? So we had the Crusades, we had the Mongol invasion,
and then the bubonic, then the bubonic plague, of course.
Right. And everybody got hit by the bubonic plague.
Yeah, but the bubonic plague especially hit the Muslim world really hard. Millions of people died. Region spiraled into chaos. And it wasn't really until the Ottoman Empire swooped in that the Middle East saw any type of stability. And before I segue into the Ottoman Empire, like something that's super interesting is that the British and the Americans, their first interest in the Middle East had way more to do with piracy, because when a country falls, like when a society collapses, people resort to, I mean, now people resort to selling drugs and prostitution and stuff like that and joining militias. And in the case of like Eastern Africa, pirates, like Somalian pirates. But I mean, that was the same back then. People would become pirates. So the Middle East was a haven for pirates. So what's super interesting is that, you ever hear the story of Thomas Jefferson and the Barbary Pirates?
No.
You never heard about
Please tell
that?
me. No, please tell me.
This is a little bit of sidetrack, but it's a super interesting story. So the Middle East was infested with pirates at the birth of our country during the time of U.S. independence. Basically, what they would do is that they would hold ships hostage, and if you paid them a tax or if you bribed them, they would let you go. The U.S. said, we're not going to pay that. We're not going to pay that. We're not doing that. Screw you. So the U.S. sent their fleet at this time. There's like 4 or 5 ships, their fleet to the Middle East, and they hired a mercenary army of like Greeks and native Barbers. And they ended up defeating a large part of those pirates. And that marine saber?
Yeah, the scimitar?
Yeah, that was actually a gift from some local emir or something like that.
Interesting.
That was that's from the Arab world or Northern Africa.
I've always wondered about that, because that doesn't look like like a blade that like the English would have brought over.
No,
or like
that's
the French.
That's a blade that's from Northern Africa.
That's cool.
The more you know.
Scimitars.
The more you know. So, all right, I'm getting too sidetracked here. So the Ottomans, they conquered a territory comparable to the size of the Roman Empire. In fact, what they created was a Sultanate of Rome. The stated goal of the Ottoman Empire was to create a Muslim Roman Empire, which is interesting, right? So their territories, basically, it's Rome minus Europe, plus
Rome minus Jesus.
Yeah, Rome minus Jesus. Well, Rome didn't.
Well, actually, no, that's not till like late Rome. Yeah. Rome minus the Pantheon.
But this is really important to understand for the greater context of Sykes-Picot in World War I. So the problem with the Ottomans is that they weren't Arabs. They were Turkish.
Right.
So you have a situation in the Middle East and Northern Africa where the majority of Arabs became the subjects to the minority Turks. When the Ottomans started to decline, European powers started to realize that this is something that they could exploit in order to divvy up the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And
those guys aren't like you. You should do something about it.
Exactly. And it's going to make sense as we get into World War I stuff.
Yeah.
But they realized that the Arab-Turk split existed. It's because the minority ethnic group ruled over the majority one, at least in the Middle East. So what's really interesting is that for most of the 19th century, it was British policy to support the Ottomans as a bulwark against the Russian Empire. So, this was the time of the Great Game, when Britain's primary imperial rival were the Russians. Basically, the Great Game is like the imperial chess game between Britain and Russia over like Afghanistan and Central Asia. Basically, Russia was expanding and Britain was like freaked out because whenever somebody approaches India is like, if you look at like English history, India is like their ball sack. Like whenever someone comes close to their ball sack, they're like, wow, no, you gotta get away, go away.
Curl up into a ball, get into a defensive posture.
Yeah, to get into a defensive posture. So it's like a 100-year-long system of just like espionage and spies and intelligence operations against the two countries and deals and all this crazy stuff. So that was the history between Russia and Britain for a long time, and it was British policy to make sure the Ottoman Empire would be there. So in the case of Russia expanded over into like Constantinople or into Turkey, that they wouldn't be able to do that because that would be very bad news for British policy at the time.
Right.
In 1853, a world war breaks out.
Oh, I don't think that World War I started that early.
No. So I don't understand why there's only 2 world wars. There's only World War
I mean,
I
I think 2 is enough.
No, but I don't understand how people only define world wars as World War I and World War II.
Okay.
The Crimean War, in my opinion,
one
was
versus Ukraine versus Russia like a couple of years ago.
No, the war between was definitely a world war. It was a war between the British, French, and the Ottoman empires against the Russian Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, fighting took place all over the world. Fighting took place over the Balkans to the Baltic Sea to Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Millions of people died. It was absolutely a world war, in my opinion. Like, it was just
sounds like it.
It was the most brutal war in the 19th century, besides maybe the Civil War. At least European war. It was a terrible.
The Civil War was in one country. Or 2, if you really want to be technical about it.
Like fighting took place in Asia. Fighting took place in the Baltic Sea. Most of the fighting took place in the Balkans area. But I think it's. I don't want to like start just renaming wars, but I think it could be considered a world war.
I mean, that's like calling Pluto a planet again. You know, like at this point.
It's a good point. Touche. So. Nevertheless, in the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire started slacking big time. They started falling technologically behind European powers, and the Ottomans started falling in a massive amount of debt. One, due to the Crimean War. If I'm pronouncing that, save your
Crimean.
Save your comments to our PO box because I mispronounce everything.
You can fax us.
You could fax us. You can text me at 555-555-555-555.
Yeah.
55-8432. But yeah, due to the war, they were in massive debt. And they also invested in these really, really stupid infrastructure projects. So if you're by a computer right now, or if you're on your phone, most likely, like just type in like this stupid Ottoman and Egyptian infrastructure, like the Egyptian Opera House was like a big one because Egypt was a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire at the time.
Right.
It's like all these super luxurious, like
they were stunting
stuff like that.
They were stunting.
You know what they mean? You gotta get money for your subjects when things aren't going well. You know how to make yourself look good? You buy a palace, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When things are in the gutter, the number one thing to make it look like you're not in the gutter is you buy a fucking palace.
Right. It's like, look at my palace, bitch.
Look at my palace, bitch. Do I look like I'm in debt? I'm balling right now, bitch.
Yeah, paper houses. I mean, shit.
Paper houses. Some people are really overcompensating for something.
Yeah, seriously.
Right? Like some people really are overcompensating. If only these guys had something to increase their performance, It's like something affordable, something chewable, something blue.
Ooh. I think
guys, let's just take a quick moment to talk about sex. Good sex. So unlike in the 19th century, now you can increase your performance and get that extra confidence in bed. Listen up, BlueChew.com. That's blue like the color blue. Blue Chew brings you the first chewable with the same FDA-approved active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, so they work well. You can take them anytime, day or night, even on a full stomach. And since they're chewable, they work up to twice as fast as a pill. Ooh. So you can be ready whenever you want, when the opportunity arises, my brother.
Yep.
And ladies, you can get them for your man as well. I have to tell you something really funny. So did I ever tell you the story about when I got I asked my doctor for a prescription of Cialis. I was like, hey, I'm having trouble down there, and he gave me a subscription. So I went over to the pharmacy, And I'm in line. It's like a super attractive pharmacist. So I'm just like mortified. I'm mortified. There's like a super attractive girl behind me too. At the same
And you're
time,
in like your 20s and shit, you know,
I'm
and it's
I'm like 25 years old. I'm like, shit. I'm so embarrassed. And then my insurance doesn't even end up paying for it. So
so
I'm
you have
just
to
like,
pay out of pocket.
no,
And
I
the
didn't
whole
get it. I was
thing.
just like, oh, never mind. Joke.
That's not even me. It's not even mine. What are you talking about?
No, but with Blue Chew, you can avoid all this. If you could benefit from extra function and more confidence where it counts, Blue Chew is the fast and easy way to enhance your performance. Most guys talk a good game, but Blue Chew helps you follow through. Blue Chew is prescribed online and shipped straight to your door in a discreet package. Yeah. So no in-person doctor visits, no waiting in the pharmacy, and best of all, no more awkwardness. And believe me, telling your doctor you need Viagra is more awkward than having them touch your balls.
And they will touch your balls.
Yeah, it's more awkward.
Yeah.
They're made in the USA, and since Blue Chew prepares and ships direct, they're cheaper than a pharmacy. Right now, we got a special deal for our listeners. Visit bluechew.com and get your first shipment free when you use our special promo code BRO. That's BRO. Just pay $5 shipping. Again, that's BLUE chew.com, promo code BRO to try it free. Blue Chew is the better, cheaper, faster choice, and we thank them for sponsoring this podcast.
Thank you, Blue Chew.
Thank you, Blue Chew. Making people happy. That's the type of people that we want to work with.
Definitely.
So back to the Ottomans, those Ottomans who couldn't get it up, so they had to spin on lavish palaces.
That's right.
That's what happens. If only Blue Chew was around back in the 19th century, you would have none of the problems in the Middle East.
I know, right? They wouldn't have needed to buy all of those palaces.
They wouldn't have needed. So, all right, let's go to the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So by 1876, the Ottoman government, they go completely bankrupt. And the British policy prior to that was to support them. It was a bulwark against the Russian Empire.
Right.
But different things are going on at this time. So we got to remember the Germans are now a country.
The Germans?
The Germans are now a country. That's scary, right? Who gave those guys a country?
They gave it to themselves.
That was a bad idea, as we see throughout history. So the Germans get a country. So Russia's not like the big imperial rival that they used to be. Now it's Germany. And then, so the British decided to really abandon their 50-year-old policy of supporting the Ottoman Empire. And the British were buying so much, they're investing so much in Ottoman treasury and Egyptian treasury because Egypt was an Ottoman asset at that time. Mm-hmm. Not only did the British stop financing the Ottomans, but they started to seize their assets from the government and their vassal states. So first they seized Cyprus, which is that little turdy-looking island off the coast of Turkey and Syria.
Oh, it's a nice country.
It's kind of
a nice island.
I'm sure it's beautiful, but if you look on a Mercator projection map, it kind of looks like a turd. So They take that turdy-looking island, Cyprus, and then they seize the real important asset, the Suez Canal in 1882.
That's what they wanted in the first place. Anyway.
That's what they wanted. So the Suez Canal is an extremely, extremely, extremely important waterway. To this day, it's the most strategic waterway in the world. So they seized the Suez Canal in 1882. And by World War I, the Ottomans were referred to as the sick man of Europe. And I'm pretty sure anyone who knows even a little bit about World War I has probably heard that term. They lost the vast majority of their territory. Really, with the exception, the only territory they had left at this time, going into World War I, was the western coast of what is now, the eastern coast of what is now Saudi Arabia, the Levant, Turkey, just the Middle Eastern areas and some of the coastal areas of Saudi Arabia. So at the same time when the Ottoman Empire is going down the gutter, this is the climax of European imperialism. All right.
Climax.
Blue Chew. This is the climax of European imperialism. So the Scramble of Africa. When are you going to talk about Sykes-Picot?
I know, right?
I'm getting there. Trying to lead up to the event. That's what I'm trying to do.
All right, tell me about Africa.
So the Scramble of Africa, you've probably heard of it. It's when all the it starts off with Belgium taking Congo.
That's right.
And they're like, oh, look what this little small shit country can do. And they can just take a country in the middle of Africa that has a way bigger population. Let's all do it. And everyone just starts taking a bunch of countries in Africa. And in like a 30-year period, I think it went from like 10% European controlled to 95% European controlled. I forget the exact statistic, but it's something insane like that.
It was pretty rapid, yeah.
Africa was taken over by the European imperial countries in a matter of about 3 decades. All of it, almost every speck of land was taken over. So, in late 19th century, there was a imperial standoff between the French and the British Empire and the Sudan. And to make a long story short, and this is really important for the context of World War I, like pay attention to this part. It's called the Fashada. The Fashada. And the sirens choose to interrupt me at the most important part of the podcast.
Right on cue.
right on cue. It always happens at the most important part of the podcast. They know.
All the haters, what they're doing is they're actually just calling 911 near your house.
They're breaking their hips. Haters gonna hate, man. All right, so the Fashoda incident is a key thing that you have to know. So it's an imperial standoff between the British and the French Empire. It's in Sudan. What happens, to make a long story short, it comes to a peaceful resolution. It wasn't actually like a military conflict. It was more of like a political conflict between the two foreign policy establishments of each country. They were arguing over different claims in Africa. And what comes of it is that France recognizes Britain's right to Egypt. Claim to Egypt.
Right.
Recognize all claim to Egypt. You recognize all claim to Morocco. Like that was basically it. So France recognizes England's claim to Egypt, and then England recognizes France's claim to Morocco. But here's the thing. Who the fuck cares about Morocco, right? Like, Morocco's not really that important, right?
In the 18th century? Oh, 19th century?
Yeah, come on.
I don't know. There's a lot of spices and stuff there. It's a pretty cool country. They got riads.
What's more important, Egypt or Morocco?
I mean, geopolitically, probably Egypt because of the Suez Canal. But yeah.
Forever. It's always been.
But you got to be specific because, you know, Morocco's a cool country.
I'm not saying which country's cooler. I'm saying what's important is what country. If you're playing Monopoly, what would you rather land on? Park or Boardwalk or the stupid
purple one in the
purple
beginning.
One, whatever it is. Would you rather land on Charizard or Caterpie?
Yeah.
The only Monopoly I play is Pokemon Monopoly. So
I didn't know that there was a Pokemon Monopoly, and now I have to go get it.
Yeah, I think Charizard and maybe like Articuno or the
Articuno,
Broadway and Boardwalk. Mm-hmm. What would you rather land on? You want to land on Boardwalk or Park Place?
For Charizard. For Charizard.
So when this happens, it looks really bad to the French. They're like, man, we just got swindled again.
It's like, damn it.
Those damn Brits, they swindled us again. Son of a bitch. It was more like, oh, that's all three.
Oh, putain.
Sacré bleu.
Sacré bleu.
So it was more of like that. So going into that context, this is when the French start becoming very, very suspicious of every single move that's really made from the British Empire.
I mean, as they should have. Brits were really sneaky then.
As they should have. As in tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So let's skip ahead. So as I said before, the new imperial rival for everyone is Germany at this time. And part of the reason why they made this they made a truce was because they both recognized that Germany had a population of 80 million people. They took the characteristics of the Prussian military. Prussia had previously just wiped the floor with France in a war. The German army would have wiped the floor with Britain in a war. They recognized that we got to stick together. These Germans they would kick our ass without each other. So there's this new policy that arises where they support each other, but they're also secretly back, like they're frenemies. The frenemy policy is basically what happens. So they both become highly suspicious of each other from all their moves, but they had to like be really smooth about what their intentions were. Like, you know, like they had to, it was like an internal diplomatic war under the scenes, even though that they were still allies. So World War I breaks out. Let's just skip right ahead. So when World War I breaks out, there is the primary European influence in the Ottoman Empire at this time is Germany. The Ottoman Empire does ally with Germany, and what they do is that they declare a jihad on the British and French troops.
Whoa!
So what this means is that the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire is a very influential figure in the Ottoman world at this time. So what this basically means is that the British need to be really careful about their Muslim subjects rising up against them, which is a big problem because
they're outnumbered.
The Britain have been putting down revolts their entire life. You know, that's the British Empire.
Ergo India.
And they know how far a Muslim revolt can go. They've dealt with them before. So they're like, fuck, what do we do? All right, well, what we could do is that we can invade, like we're fighting Germany right now in a brutal stalemate war on the Western Front. It's really bad, not going anywhere, and a lot of people are dying. So why don't we try doing this? We got to take out the Ottomans because they're pissing off all the Muslims in our territories.
Right.
So let's invade the Ottoman Empire.
That sounds like a good idea.
Let's do that. We'll take them out, and then we'll go straight up to we'll go through Turkey and then up to Europe, and then we'll win. We'll win the war. And that'll be it. We'll take out Austria, and then Germany will be completely screwed over. The Ottoman Empire is weak. As we know, we just seized a bunch of their assets a couple of years ago. They can't do nothing.
They're the sick man.
They're the sick man of Europe. So this is where the story gets kind of fucked up. And this is where that political grandstanding between the British and the French starts to really play a part. So what they originally wanted to do is that they wanted to take this port called in Alexandretta. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Alexandretta. So it's a port that is in the – so prior to this, I'm getting too ahead of myself. So prior to this, France had already told Britain prior to the war that they were interested in Syria.
Right. They're trying to get in on this game.
And Britain said nothing. They were like, oh, yeah, sure, take it. Go, yeah, whatever. And French were like, we have a claim to Syria. Because there's a really long history of Franks in Syria. And, Damascus is basically a holy city and all that. And,
right.
There's like a union. There's a bunch of French schools there and stuff. They're like, we deserve it. We deserve it. So the British say nothing. So they wanted to invade, first they wanted to invade the Ottoman Empire. They wanted to take this part that was in I think right now the modern day border of Syria and Turkey in Alexandretta.
Right.
And the French were like, don't fucking even try to do that. Like, we don't trust you for a second. Once you land there, you're going to claim that area. We've already said we wanted that area. Don't even try that.
Right.
So the British are like, fine, we'll do it. We'll do something else. So they decide to invade. They decide to invade Gallipoli. So the Battle of Gallipoli.
That's a big battle. Yeah.
Battle of Gallipoli in World War I was one of the most humiliating defeats in military history. The British Empire, the British Australian primarily troops were slaughtered on that beach. It was completely slaughtered. Very unpopular. Winston Churchill almost ruined his political career for it because he was one of the people who spearheaded it.
Right.
So it ended up really, really, really bad. And it was due to a dumb, stupid political move. They should have taken a different port in the first place. They should have taken the Alexandretta port, but they didn't because they didn't want to piss off the French. They didn't want to alienate them. And at this time, the French were taking on the brunt of the war in the Western Front, so they couldn't piss them off too much. It was too close of an ally.
They're doing all the legwork.
So when that fails, they decide that they need to do something different. All right, what are we going to do? We're in a stalemate we're basically in two stalemates. We have a stalemate in the Western Front. We have a stalemate down in Turkey. Like this is just terrible. Like this is awful. I don't think this can get any worse. So remember, so if you go back, I said way back, I said that the British realized that something that they could exploit in the Ottoman Empire was that the majority Turks or minority Turks ruled over the majority Arabs.
Right.
Oh.
So basically
that's something that we can work with, right?
Yep. They put together a bunch of bots.
And at that time.
And then they infiltrated Twitter. And then they started putting out a bunch of fake news.
Exactly.
To divide the people. That's what happened.
So they're like, okay, this is something that we can work with. We can work with this. We can get these Arabs riled up. Cause some mischief. So what they do is that they tell. So here's one thing they need to do. It's like it's a brilliant plan, and the British are also interested in the Middle East because they had just recently discovered oil in Iran, and they're just making a shitload of money.
Right, they stepped in it.
They figured that there is going to be a lot of oil other places in the Middle East, so they really wanted some certain areas. But besides that, this is just the strategic battle stuff. So they go to the Arabs. They go to the Sharif of Mecca. They go to Sharif Hussein. And they're like, hey, buddy, we're fighting these fucking Turkey bastards. How about your own state? How do you like that? You get your own Arab state.
Get your own palace, too.
You get all your own. And the Sharif of Mecca was like, yeah. Hell yeah.
Sure.
Hell yeah. I'll just wait till this
homocycle. Yeah.
I'll just wait till this motorcycle goes. All right. So the Arabs. So Sharif Hussein was like, "Yeah, buddy, tell me more about this Arab state. I'm definitely down for this." So they tell them like, "Hey, listen, you start a revolt. You can have your Arab independence. We'll get to Turkey. Will be gone." And you'll have your own Arab state. You know, you'll have Damascus. You'll have this big area. It's all carved out for you for helping us defeat the Ottoman Empire. So they revolt. And this is a story of like Lawrence of Arabia. You know, when like the famous story of Lawrence of Arabia, you know, they start defeating the Ottomans and they start engaging in guerrilla warfare. They eventually take Damascus and then it's gone. The British overpromised it. So they also promised Damascus to the French at the same time. They also did to the Arabs. So the British during World War I, they were in this whole game of trying to please the Arab population along with the French population. And then later in the war, they tried to please the Zionists. They just overpromised land in the Middle East that they couldn't give to everyone. And at the same time, they also had their own imperial ambitions. So they didn't get their own state, the Arabs. It was famously the French Mandate in Syria. And that's why everything's so fucked up there.
I mean, basically, they were like promising the one girl to go to prom with her if she would just do this one thing. And then they promised the other girl. And now can't bring two girls to prom. It's not possible. It's against the rules.
Yeah, basically.
That's what happened.
Unless you're a pimp, but British ain't pimps. So that's basically what happened. So they overpromised.
You ain't pimps.
So, I mean, the reason why they reached out to the Sharif of Mecca is because the Sharif of Mecca had a direct lineage to Muhammad. So they had he had more street credit. He had more street credit than the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in the Muslim world. So that would cause a ruckus in the Ottoman Empire, and then it would also prevent rebellions within British territory.
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty much a story that led up to Sykes-Picot. That the Sykes-Picot agreement was basically the deal that was secret between the French and the British that the Arabs didn't know about, to divide the area up without them knowing. I mean, there's more layers to Sykes-Picot. Like Russia and Italy and all these other countries were involved, but Sykes-Picot got spun upside down because Russia went communist and they pulled out, and they were supposed to get Constantinople and stuff like that. And so like a lot of, the Sykes-Picot that you look at, like the line between
the crayon line
and Persian, like that's not what ended up happening. Like, these different countries ended up being formed, and Israel and Palestine, and that ended up being formed as well. But that's basically what it was. So, I mean, that was a 55-minute explanation of Sykes-Picot. How did I do? Is that good?
I know a lot more about it now than I did before. I'll tell you that right now. And it's not an easy topic, but I think what I've learned so far is that it's not just cultural or linguistic differences. It's like a bunch of like external geopolitics that really screwed up the whole area. And I find it really interesting, especially in the beginning when you talk about those names. Like, I can't get around the fact that nobody really knows why they called it Iraq. They're just like, yeah, that sounds good. Iraq.
Maybe somebody knows somewhere, or maybe someone has some source. If someone has a source of where the name Iraq comes from,
I'd love to know that.
I would love to know that, because I don't know. As far as I know, it's just like something that's out of the blue.
What would you have called it? If it was up to you,
I would have called it like Mesopotamia or something.
Sumeria, maybe.
Sumeria. I would have called it something if I was like a British officer or somebody who was like making deals back in the 14th century, in the early 20th century on behalf of the empire. I would have called it something like Mesopotamia or something like that. I mean, I wouldn't have drawn those lines, first of all.
Yeah.
Even if I was drawing up lines, I would have drawn up different lines if I was an imperialist.
For sure. I would have drawn them up based on like geography.
I wouldn't have touched Palestine. I could tell you that much. I would just have been like, French can have it. I would have said, you can have it. I would have, if I was a British imperialist, the only thing I really would have been concerned about was getting the land. I wouldn't be that concerned about getting Jerusalem. I'd be more concerned about getting like Gaza in places. Yep. Would have a strategic
around the Suez Canal.
Yeah. And then I would try to get the areas down near Kuwait.
In that little corner.
Yeah. In that little corner. And then I would try to get lands that were close to the where we found oil in Persia. That's where
everything around like Oman.
I would end up there. I would let the British didn't really want Syria. That's the thing. The French were the ones who had this weird obsession with them, because the French, I feel like the French had, like, just reading more about that time period. And obviously I'm reading like biased writers and I'm reading English, people who are writing in English. So I don't.
You got to learn French just to do this, right?
Yeah, I'm reading way more people like English historians and American historians who tend to be a little bit more sympathetic to the British side than the French. Like, it's very rare that you're going to find like too many British and American historians that like paint the French as the good guys. But what you find is that the general perception that they give is that the French had like some type of dogmatic view on spreading like liberty and justice, but they did it with like a cruel hand. But I guess you can say the exact same thing about like America,
democracy.
You'll be able to come up with that exact narrative 100 years from now. I mean, now you can come
up with it right now.
But like, especially 100 years ago, when they start when historians start looking at, why did America completely destroy Iraq?
Well, there was this ancient communication technology called Twitter.
America was obsessed with spreading democracy. It was ingrained in their blood. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's exactly how the historians will paint that story.
Maybe. We'll be the democratists, remember?
I mean, there's going to be different historians who paint things in different ways, even how we do it right now.
Right.
I mean, there's still people who paint the Iraq War as a good thing. There's still people who paint a lot of these Middle Eastern conflicts as completely justified. And there's going to be people who paint them like that 100 years from now. I
want to buy like a history textbook from like high school or some shit like that today. and
Yeah,
like
that would
read
be
those
super.
sections.
That
We
would
should
be a
do that.
very interesting project
Yeah,
to
we
go
should do that.
through an old school history, like something, because we're roughly the
We should
same.
get an old one and a new one so we can compare how they talk about it.
Well, those new textbooks are expensive as hell.
I think I have my little sister's still in high school. Maybe I'll just steal hers.
Yeah, just steal her book. Where's your book?
I think they do them digitally now.
My brother took it for his podcast.
I used to get yelled at if I didn't have a cover on my textbook.
You know what's disgusting?
What?
Textbook, like middle school textbooks.
Yeah,
Because I'm just thinking back right now. Middle school textbooks, I remember like turning page because they would be passed down from class to class. So you would get someone from the previous year's book.
I used to love reading all of like, you'd write your name in the inside cover, be like, oh, Danny Abdel-Jabbar.
It would be great when you get somebody's book who is funny. Like, oh, I got this guy's book. This guy is hilarious. I can't wait to see what he wrote.
Yeah.
And then you'll be like dicks everywhere. Like, he got me.
Yeah.
You put a dick in Woodrow Wilson's mouth. Like it's, that's sometimes you just find snot.
The pages stick together.
Just be like, oh, someone left a pile of snot in their textbook. That's disgusting. Hopefully I don't get blamed for this.
Right? My name's in this book right now.
Yeah, I don't want to be the snot guy. Well, it is what it. I mean, there's so much more to discuss on this. I know I've missed a lot of stuff that I should have talked about, but I just wanted to get a very broad, like, I wanted to give kind of a broad lesson on this. Not lesson, but I wanted to do a broad thing on this rather than like.
It was a bro history.
Yeah, I wanted to do something more broad and just explain like the pieces in a more holistic form than rather than like, oh, well, on this date, the guys who were negotiating this deal were Mark Sykes on behalf of the British and Sky Gray,
Monsieur Picot.
McMahon was like another British officer who was doing a lot of the negotiation. He was the one who was communicating with Sharif Hussein, and there's like a lot of letter correspondence that go deep into basically how the British completely misled the Arabs to thinking that they would give them an Arab state. And it's like, it's really funny looking through these letters because it starts out as very specific. So the British are like, yeah, well, you're going to get this area. And then it just comes complete, like the following letters are completely vague. There's like, maybe
you'll get some stuff.
And then
eventually
King Hussein, the Sharif Hussein is like, what the fuck? Why are you being so vague now? You said we're going to get our own state. So it's interesting. There's so much more into this topic, and there's, I'm sure there's so much more that hasn't been explored yet into it. But the books that I really suggest, if you really, really want to learn more about this, and we'll definitely be touching on this topic more because it's such an important part of like the overall thing that we talk about. We talk so much about the Middle East, so why not talk about something that's just so pivotal in Middle Eastern history?
Right.
A book that I'd recommend reading would be A Line in the Sand. A Line in the Sand is great. That is by, I just want to give you the author's name real quick to do it justice. Cricket. James Barr. All right, yeah. A Line in the Sand by James Barr, and then A Peace to End All Peace is another one. That's by David Fromkin. Let me just confirm that author's name. I don't want to be the dickhead who got the author's name wrong. My internet is slow. Yeah, David Fromkin. Bro, those are really good books to read if you wanna go deep into the subject. There's a lot of books that go more into like, I didn't really touch Israel and Palestine at all, or like the Zionist movements, but Honestly, that's just another subject for another day. We will get into that. But anything else before we conclude this? We're going on over an hour at this point.
Nothing, man. Thanks for bringing me up to speed on Sykes-Picot.
You're welcome. All right, everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Make sure that you rate and review the podcast. That is the number one way to support the show. Rate and review. And I love you guys. Appreciate the time that you give us. And we look forward to giving you more episodes soon. Peace.
See ya.